Welcome to A Case of the Mondays, a podcast by 3R Strategy where we talk about some of the most pressing issues facing HR professionals and business leaders. From fair treatment of employees to fostering transparency in the workplace, we'll explore how to create an environment where people don't just have to come to work, but want to. So, if you're feeling blue, tune in and join the conversation so you don't end up with a case of the Mondays.
Welcome to another episode of A Case of the Mondays, a podcast by 3R Strategy. My name is Ramiz Kaleem, your podcast host, and today we have one of our reflections episode where we talk about what we discussed with our guest speaker in this month's topic and to answer any questions that we get sent in by our listeners. This month, our guest speaker was Ali Khan, who is the CEO of Shape Global, the employee experience company. This time we have a very special episode where we are joined by one of our regular listeners and are going to reflect on this together. And so I'm really delighted to welcome our guest, Jo Gorse. Jo is an HR consultant who also runs her own podcast, The HR Detective, asking HR questions from her speakers and to try and get an answer to the mystery and solve the mystery together. Welcome to the podcast, Jo.
Thank you very much, Ramiz.
I'm really delighted to have you on the podcast because I know you are a regular listener and you comment on the topics that we cover and the guests that we have. And like I said, we always take in some questions in our reflections episode from our listeners. And so, let's start with your key or a couple of your key takeaways from that conversation where with Ali we discussed how they're really using data to try and gather what the employees value in the workplace.
Yeah, so I love this episode because it focused on employee experience, which is something that I really feel strongly about. And the first thing that I reflected on was the purpose that Ali talked about. So he recalled a business leader that he'd recently talked to, and I'm going to read it because I've written it down. I want to make sure I get it right. And he said, this leader had said, most people just want to come to work to contribute to something bigger than themselves. Now, that in itself doesn't say too much, but if you think about it, it calls upon the belief. So when employees come to work, they come and they want a purpose. And that purpose should be a shared purpose for the organisation, for the employees to feed that greater good, the client, the outcome, the service, whatever that delivery model is. They're not coming for the product. They're coming for that purpose, and that purpose will drive it. And by picking up on that, it's almost like Martin Luther King. I had a dream, I believe. And that's where that statement comes from, that everybody's buying into that belief. If they come to work and are motivated to continue to be productive within the workplace, they believe in what the organisation is trying to achieve. And that's when they get that shared purpose. And working together on that shared purpose, it's absolutely gold. All that can happen is high productivity, high levels of motivation, high engagement. So that was the first thing that I reflected on. But then the second thing, which I think you questioned him on a little bit to try and pull out, are all these little influences that affect employees within the workplace. So we've all worked in a workplace where somebody's colder than another person, so the temperature gets turned up, and then very quickly somebody else is too warm and they're taking off the jumper and the cardigan and they're still too warm, so the temperature goes down, and it almost becomes a war within the office of who controls the thermostat to get it to that ideal temperature to work in. And that's been going on for decades, absolutely decades. And it does create to the environment, and that environment and that work environment and how people feel within it then directly affects how they're going to be motivated, productive within that workplace. And if they're coming into work thinking, oh, well, I've got to wear 5 layers today because I know I'm going to be freezing in the morning and I'm going to be really warm in the afternoon because there's this temperature war going on. And then you'll have health and safety coming around as well, trying to keep it at the optimum 18 degrees for everybody, because that's a scientific finding of health and safety of what is the optimum. But that then leads to everybody's an individual. So when you look at employee experience, you don't look at, let's group Gen Z, let's group millennials, let's group baby boomers all together. It's, yes, you've got all these different generations all working in the same environment together, but you've got individuals within that. And all the individuals, even though they may trend a certain way with data, they still have nuances that will help them be more productive, be more motivated, and want to achieve the same purpose of the organisation. So they're the main things that I took away.
Yeah, I mean, I found that really interesting because, it's the sort of thing that you might laugh off in the workplace where somebody's wearing a jumper or wearing a scarf and thinking, oh, they're really cold. Somebody else a few feet away is feeling really warm. But really, the data is showing how this can have a real impact on the performance of an organization. And I wonder, I guess, that could be one of the reasons why so many people like working from home, because you can have just the right temperature for yourself, not have to worry about anyone else. And these are the sort of little things I think we just take for granted. And to me, that was really interesting to say, something as deep as a sense of purpose can be impacted by something as trivial as temperature, because these things accumulate over time, and every day you're coming in and you're finding it uncomfortable to work in that environment, and it almost impacts your, is it really worth having this sense of purpose if I have to put up with this every day?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that I found that really interesting. And then to me, I'm a data person. We're a reward organization, so we deal a lot with data. And I think in HR and in different areas, we can often have opinions about different things. And I think if we're trying to drive any sort of change with an opinion, that opinion needs to be backed up with some reasoning. It doesn't necessarily have to be data, but it has to be some sort of reasoning and rationale. And that's why I found the episode really interesting, because it was all backed by, this is why we think this is important to this group of people. And then it's for us to think about how we use that information. So was, in your experience of working within HR, I know you were saying that data is now becoming more important, but do you think that as an HR function, we are using data in the right way, or enough of data, or does there need to be a lot more emphasis on this, or is it just us data geeks that are talking about this?
Yeah, so I think data is being used, but not everywhere. It's very easy to fall back into policy and process rather than be data led in decision making. And I think it's very important to you talk about the why quite a lot, and looking at the why, you need data to inform that why. And I think HR, in my experience, and HR organizer or HR teams that I've worked with, they are using more data, but not necessarily in the right way. It's very easy to and I think Ali picked up on this as well. It's very easy to put bias onto data to be able to feed your agenda in any way. So it is easy to manipulate it. I think with this employee experience tool that Shape Global have got, it looks at, I think, about 12 different areas. and looking at, so within organisations, he also talked about banding of organisations. So the senior exec team, the managers, and then employees. So even just in those three, you get that different view. And you need that whole holistic view of different perceptions to be able to then feed into the work that you're going to do within the HR space. Without data, you have good intentions, and you may go with common trends, but you're not really going to be able to achieve or even measure what you're achieving if you haven't got that data as a baseline. So data is really important, but it's not just about getting any data. It's the right kind of data to be able to answer the question that you want to put forward, to be able to feed into the work that you need to do and find that improvement. So if it is in employee experience, then the data that you need is about those areas that are affecting the employee. And experience is now becoming it is a buzzword, but I think it's a change in how HR are moving. And the only way to understand individuals' experience is to gather the data, but in the right way, and then using it the right way.
Yeah, and I think also when it comes to data, often when there's two different ways of looking at data. One is looking back at what's happened in the past, but I think when data becomes really powerful is when we can start to think about how things are going to, how this data is going to impact us in the future. So again, because I work in reward, if I use that example, the way that we often pay people, and we say we want to pay for performance. And what we do is we look at how somebody has done over the last 12 months and say that you had an exceptional year. We're going to give you a 20% pay rise. So we're looking at the past to pay somebody for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And that may just be an exceptional year. It could be that there were some circumstances. So what we really, when I think about that example and pay, what we really should be doing is getting a better insight into, does that past performance really mean that somebody's going to continue to perform well in the future because they're developing their skills? Or it could just be they were lucky to get some few leads coming into them and they had an amazing sales
goal. If they're aiming for that goal to get that bonus, they've got the bonus, and that may be enough for them.
Yeah, and so when I was speaking to Ali, I think the what I found, so his experience was blood diagnosis, which I didn't really know what it was, but it was looking at analyzing blood to see what sort of diseases might be developing in the future.
Yeah.
And so it's using employee data in the same way to say, let's look at the data now to predict how our retention and how our reward and recognition might be in the future and our engagement. And I think that's maybe the shift that we need to make, is not just focus on having data, but seeing how that data is going to predict the future.
Yeah, and I think it's what happens next too. So with Shape Global, they run this survey using. I don't think it's just a survey. I think there's lots of other things that they do, but they have this toolbox and they conduct this this service to get all of the data. But then what? So that data, it may be, okay, we have this data, so the prediction could be, if we have this data and we do nothing now, we may have a higher turnover within the next 9 to 12 months because we aren't making any changes in the reward area, or we aren't making any changes in flexibility. Or it may be that the exit data is showing us that people are leaving more because of lack of flexibility. So is, what do we do with that data then? So is it that we're getting a baseline from all of this to understand and predict what's going to happen with these employees within this organisation in the future, so that then we can look at how can we make those changes? If it's a negative, how can we prevent this high turnover that's going to come in the next 6 to 9 months? Or how can we increase employee experience? Where are the hotspot areas? Where do we need to focus now within the next few months? Where do we need to focus in the medium term and the long term to improve employee experience? And I think this prediction tool showing where the hotspots are and where they are performing well. So he also spoke about struggling, striving, and flourishing. And I think so. There's the ultimate aim is to flourish. But just because you're struggling, it doesn't mean everything's wrong there, or it's a bad manager, or things going wrong there. There could be lots of different implications into that data. So it's understanding what's fed into that. It could be that it's a brand new team, or they've had high turnover, or the budget's being cut for any reason, and that's why that becomes a hotspot area. So it's understanding everything around it as well, rather than it just being numbers on a page.
Yeah, and I think that was a very interesting observation for me as well. It was around that struggling, striving, flourishing, and how you can have people at the top of the organization that might be striving or flourishing, and the bottom of the organization, but it's the managers in the middle that were really struggling.
Yeah.
I mean, is that something that you have come across in any of your previous roles? And in your experience, what do you think is the key reason that middle management layer is really struggling?
It's very, very common in any kind of sector, and most managers are accidental managers. And I can't even remember who was the first person to coin that phrase, but they are accidental managers. Are really good at their job. So you may have somebody who's a really good analyst within your organization, and then they're promoted because of their skill set. They've been there a long time. They understand the organization. They understand the purpose and where it's going. It doesn't mean that they're a great manager. Doesn't even mean that they're a good manager. So but that's not necessarily their fault. We're not expecting great employees to go out and learn how to become good leaders so that they can then promote and go up another rung in the ladder. As organisations, we need to look at how we're going to be able to provide this pipeline of aspiring managers. What do we need to do? Do we wait until we're ready to promote somebody, get them in the role, see where their strengths and weaknesses are, and then give them all the key tools and skills around it? Or do we try to, one of the great things as an individual is if you strive to be better and work outside of the parameters of your role, you're stretching yourself. Now, I think everybody should do that in any role. You should always stretch yourself, but not everybody's in the right place to do that. But before you become a manager, you should learn those skills. Organisations should wrap around individuals. It may be that they don't want to become a people manager, and that's fine. But it doesn't mean to say that leadership skills will be lost on them. Everybody within an organisation is a leader in some respect, because it also helps them to have those conversations that you were talking about with your team, that they can back up with either reasoning or data, and giving them leadership skills can support them to then become people managers. But that's the biggest issue, is lack of understanding of what a people manager is, which is huge. It's not just about managing sickness or doing return to work interviews or getting your team together and making sure the mandatory training's done. It's having that emotional intelligence. It's having that compassion. It's having that understanding when things go wrong. Okay, it's gone wrong. What have we learned from it? And how can we use that learning to then move forward? That's a skill that you need to learn. It's a skill that everybody needs to learn. But as organisations, as leaderships, we need to be able to support all people within organisations to learn those skills, even if they don't stay with the organisation they're in and they go off somewhere else. Was it Richard Branson who said we should train people to be really good at their jobs so that they can leave, but we should treat them so good that they don't want to leave. And that's what we should do with managers, rather than putting them in a position where they're going to fail. And that's where they're struggling. And then you have that trickle-down effect to their teams, where they then start to feed on that negativity and probably don't understand. So the psychological safety then starts to erode, and going upwards, they're not getting the targets, they're not getting the information they want, high levels of turnover. So it's what's going on with you, and it's coming from both sides for those middle managers, and they need more support than they're actually getting.
Yeah, and I like that. I also remember a similar quote, which I can't remember who it was from, but it was basically the CEO saying, "Well, what if I train all my managers and they just end up leaving?" And the other sort of CFO maybe says, "Well, what if you don't train them and they end up staying?" So,
I like that one.
so I think that is a real challenge, because you don't really get much training for managers in most organizations. And what happens is they avoid having any sort of difficult conversations with people in their team, don't they? Particularly, again, going back to pay. Nobody likes having a pay conversation, no manager, and so they just always pass this on to HR. One of the things that I found that I really liked about this data approach is going back to performance. And I don't really like the term performance management, and we don't use that term.
I like
because
your term. I like the term that you use in 3R strategy.
Yeah, enabling excellence. Yes.
Yeah.
Because again, when we give, for example, an organization's performance ratings to say, oh, this person's a 1, this is a 2, 3, it just assumes that we just put people in buckets and say this is down to you. But there are, again, the data then tells us that there are so many things that impact somebody's performance, whether it's their relationship with their line manager, the relationship with their colleagues, their work environment, whether they're always feeling cold, they don't have the equipment that they need to carry out their role. So all of these different factors are impacting their performance. And so it may not be down to the individual. And then again, I think this is where, as an HR team, we can really benefit from the data to understand that, firstly, I think we should all ditch performance ratings. It's a terrible idea. And then recognize, we recently had a really interesting webinar with one of our previous clients called ABCAM, and they ditched their performance ratings. And Nick, who's their HR director, he was saying, we used to have these 4 performance ratings, and we've ditched them because we recognize that we have 1,800 employees and we have 1,800 ratings, because everyone is different and they're performing at different levels and different environments. So, I think the performance rating should be ditched, but then we need to use this data-led approach to really understand that if somebody is not performing well, I'm not saying there's never a performance issue. Yes, it could be a performance issue, but we also need to try and understand all the other aspects that might be impacting them.
Yeah, and poor performance can be dealt with with support by providing the right support for the right amount of time to help somebody get to the point where they need to get to. But understanding those external elements, and there are things outside of the work environment that may also impact on somebody's performance. So as a line manager, it's about understanding the whole individual. What is it that's impacting? Okay, so you've got issues going on at home. How long is that going to go on for, do you think? About 4 weeks. Okay, what can we do to support you in that 4-week period? Let's not look at your performance. Let's see if we can take some of the weight off your shoulders for that 4 weeks. What happens when you do that? You increase that loyalty. You increase your level of trust, you increase the psychological safety, because you've got that extra level of understanding that it's not just coming to work to do a gold standard job. You've got everything else that's impacting as well. But performance performance management is horrible. The performance ratings are horrible. If it's 1 out of 4 and I got a 3, well, what do I need to do to get a 4? What about everything that I've done in the last 12 months? I think I've done a 4. Then you've got a negative experience there with your line manager about why you haven't got a 4. But what if I get a 4 this year? What do I need to do extra? Do I need to remain stable? What am I going to do to maintain that? What if it drops to a 3? What if there's some kind of element outside of my control as an employee from the organisation? So budget cuts, for instance, so I'm not able to deliver as I did last year. Does that mean that I'm going to get a 3 this year when it's not really my fault? So looking at ratings is just, it's awful. It's about that relationship, communication, transparency, making sure that we all understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and what help and support we need to get there. So yeah, I'm with you on ratings. I think the rubbish. It's too negative. It's putting the onus on the employee to continue to strive because you're not good enough. You need to make sure you hit these targets, and only then, when you reach that highest rating, will we say you're a great employee.
Yeah, and even if you get to that, it creates that, because when you have the performance ratings, it's in most organizations anyway. You're not going to put everyone at 4 at top performing, right? And so it's almost a culture of competition, right? Because if that person's a 4, then I'm unlikely to be a 4 in the team because not everyone can be exceptional. So it's creating that culture where instead of helping and supporting the team, we're getting people to compete with each other because they also recognize that if you are a 4, then you're going to get a much higher pay rise or a bonus than me. And so if I maybe get a lead, I would rather not pass it on to my colleague so he does really well or she does really well, and I lose out.
Not a great
so
environment, that is it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm really glad that you were able to come on, and I'm not the only geek that is interested in the data. That there are others who are also interested in the data side of things. But since you are here, I'm going to ask you a question about another episode as well, where we discussed probationary periods, and I want to see what your views are about probationary periods in organizations.
Okay, so I feel very strongly on probationary periods, and I dislike them. And the reason I dislike them, you go through this whole experience for a candidate to welcome them into the organisation, for them to, you interview them. They jump through all these hoops, whether it's a 1-stage, 2-stage, 3-stage, sometimes 5-stage interviews to get the job. They walk in the door and the first thing they're told is you're on a 6-month probationary period, and after that you become a substantive member of staff. Straight away, it's a negative. So they join in the organisation and it's a negative that, okay, I've got to prove myself. Well, haven't they just proven themselves? Do you not think that they're worthy of that role after going through that interview process? Why are you employing them if you feel that they're not ready? Now, if you then look on the legalities of it, organisations will feel that they have to put probationary periods in place to protect them, that if this person isn't working out and they're a risk to my organisation, I can get them out of the door quickly. Anybody who works in HR knows that there are ways for people to leave. There are settlement agreements, there are all kinds of things like that. But what I hate most of all is somebody joins and you've got a week's notice within your probationary period. So, well, that's fine. Okay, I give you a week's notice, but I need to have found a job. In that first 6 months, if I feel that I'm not a great fit and the company is not a great fit for me and I don't want to work here, I'm not going to give them a notice straight away. So we're already in a false sense of a working relationship. And I'm off looking for another job and trying to fit interviews around my lunch or taking a half day or some toil to try and get those interviews and successfully land a job. And then I give my week's notice. Well, for the organisation, that's fine. It's a week's notice. For me, it's fine because I've got a job. But the other way around, I don't want to sign up to a role where an organisation can tell me that they can get rid of me in a week. It's going to take me about 2-3 months to find another job. So I'm potentially looking at, if I don't excel in everything that I'm doing, every minute that I'm in work, I'm potentially going to be out of work for 2 months and looking for another job. So I dislike them, Ramiz, a lot.
Okay, that's good, because when you initially said I have strong views, I thought you were strongly in favor, and I'm definitely not in favor of probationary periods. We have never had probationary periods at 3R Strategy, and never will.
No.
And I think that, the thing I often hear from HR professionals is, well, this is both for the employee and the employer. This is for the employee to say, is this the right role for me? And for the employer to say the same thing. And I always think, you have to recognize the power dynamic, right? Mm-hmm. You can't just say that an organization has hundreds of employees, but for an individual, this was what pays your mortgage. You might be moving to another part of the country to get a new job. You might be making significant changes in your lifestyle to get a new job with the commute and everything. And like you said, to then be given a week's notice and told, well, this is not working out. You might be told that, but those rights should be exactly the same. And you shouldn't have to be limited to a week. It would be like if you rented a new flat or a house, and then the landlord says, well, I'll give you the first 3 months and see if I like you living in this property, then you're welcome to stay. But if in those 3 months, I might give you a week to just vacate and move elsewhere. And it's, there is the power dynamic, which we often forget as HR professionals and just equate it as, oh, but it's for both employee and employer.
Yeah, that's a good line, isn't it? And it's a good excuse not to interview properly. It's a good interview. It's a good excuse not to onboard properly. If you're investing in somebody to come into your organisation, then you want to make sure you take the right amount of time to recruit the right person or the right people. And when you get them, you want to take the right amount of time to onboard them and welcome into the organisation so they understand and they buy in at the early point. And that's it. You want them to understand your purpose right there and join you on your journey to reach that, to continue on that journey with the purpose. But if the first thing that they hear is you're on 6 months probationary or 3 months probationary, they're not going to even think about the purpose of the organisation. They're going to think about the end result of their job role and what they need to do. They're going to look at the targets. They're not going to look at how their role interacts with somebody else's role. I remember a payroll manager once saying to me, but it's all right if we give a week's notice because everybody should have at least a month's pay in their bank account as savings. Yeah, everybody's going to do that. Everybody's absolutely going to do that. And if they haven't eaten into it already through the pandemic by buying a new spa for the garden or decorating the house or buying new office furniture, then they certainly will have eaten into it, if they had it at all, in a cost of living crisis where lots of people are struggling right now and looking for support from their employers rather than being told, prove yourself. And then we'll tell you whether you're worthy to stay within this organisation.
Yeah. No, definitely agree. So I think that's a good way to end this reflections episode. Thanks a lot, Jo, for joining on this episode. And if there is any of our listeners that are interested in joining a futures reflections episode, please do email us, podcast@3r-strategy.com. And Jo, look forward to keep hearing your feedback and critique and everything else on our future episodes.
Thanks, Ramiz. I look forward to listening to all of the episodes. Thank you.